Hello.
Yes, sir.
Can you see my screen, Himanshu?
Yes, sir. I can see.
So, hello everyone. Can everybody hear me out, please? Can you give me confirmation? So, I think we can start now.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So, can I expect other participants also to please unmute their speaker so that I can hear the responses also? It's difficult.
Sir, they are replying you in a chat box.
Yeah, so you see, I need to go to chat box once I open this presentation. So after that, I can't access that chat box that easily. Anyway, we can start up. So if you guys have any questions, then you can please let me know. So we can go and discuss that. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So now we start with presentation on for our cost and management audit. This subject. Uh, it's going to be the first class. So we are going to talk about today the nature, a brief introduction about cost audits, management audits, the nature of cost audits, what are the objectives, how this is started, and little bit background about the introduction about the cost accounting standards also.
Uh, Sir, Sweet Singla is saying you can explain in Hindi also.
Hmm. Okay, you want me to explain in Hindi also?
So, not personally me. I read one of the chat, and one side you can speak in mix.
Okay, I don't know. You guys will have to write your answers in English. तो मैं एक काम करूँगा बीच बीच में हिंदी में भी बोलूँगा.
Yeah, that would be good for all.
हाँ, basically this entire presentation is in English. तो एक काम करेंगे जिनको थोड़ा सा होगा वो प्लीज अपना स्पीकर ऑन कर ले और मुझे बताएं कहाँ पे क्या समझ में नहीं आ रहा है. ठीक है. मे आई नो द नेम ऑफ दैट जेंटलमैन.
Sorry, sir. क्या बोला आपने?
आई एम सेइंग ओके. आई एम सेइंग एक्सप्लेन इन हिंदी आल्सो. ओके. वेट.
Sir,
ये टेल मी. So now we start with this topic, and whoever wants help, so they can please, ask me in between so that I'll stop it also. Okay. तो आज जो हमारा इंट्रोडक्शन होगा, इट्स अ वेरी फर्स्ट क्लास. So I really don't know how many of you are aware about cost and management audit. What all costing, since you are a final year student, आप final में हैं, so I expect that you all know, you have a background about the costing standards, records वगैरह जो अभी तक आपने देखे होंगे. Today's this subject talks about our cost audits, the costing and how the audits are being performed on this. इसके ऊपर auditing कैसे होती है. So generally, whenever we talk about this, तो cost audit, what is the nature of cost audit? ये किस तरीके, इसका nature क्या है, हम इसको क्यों करते हैं, what are the sources, how this started, why government feel a need for this, and then cost accounting standard. Now, what are the cost accounting standards? I really don't know how many of you are aware about it. किसी भी चीज के लिए there are certain standards. Standards are basically the reference document. These are the guidelines and rules. तो आप लोगों ने कभी, आई रियली डोंट नो, यू हर्ड अबाउट द स्टैंडर्ड्स. किसी भी चीज के लिए स्टैंडर्ड्स बने हुए होते हैं. जैसे अगर सिंपल लैंग्वेज में बोलूं तो एक्ट, जो कंपनीज एक्ट है, ठीक है. तो ऐसे ही किसी भी चीज को ड्राइव करने के लिए अकाउंटिंग स्टैंडर्ड्स बने हुए. जैसे हमने फाइनेंशियल अकाउंटिंग में भी आपने सुना होगा, इंटरनेशनल आईएएस हमारे इंटरनेशनल अकाउंटिंग स्टैंडर्ड्स है, हमारे इंडियन अकाउंटिंग स्टैंडर्ड्स हैं. तो ऐसे ही कॉस्टिंग के अकाउंटिंग स्टैंडर्ड्स हैं. Now that drives our cost audits. So we'll talk about that also. So now I start with these things. A brief introduction about cost accounting, cost records, and cost statements. Now these are the things around which our cost audit revolves. हमारे cost audits किसके ऊपर होते हैं? Cost accounting के ऊपर हैं, हमारे cost records के ऊपर हैं, and about our cost statements. Is this okay? Can somebody confirm me? Am I going a little bit fast, or is this okay?
It's okay.
Okay, basically I can't see the chats, guys. Just give me one. Okay, thanks. So now when we talk about for the cost accounting, cost record, and cost statements, we need to understand, you would have already read in a subject till now what the cost accounting is. Now, cost accounting, we define this as a process of identification, classification, measurement, and assignment of cost to various cost objects. तो इन नटशेल जब हमारी पूरी कॉस्ट अकाउंटिंग हो रही है, उसमें हमारा आइडेंटिफिकेशन, क्लासिफिकेशन, मेजरमेंट एंड असाइनमेंट ऑफ कॉस्ट टू वेरियस कॉस्ट सब्जेक्ट्स. इन नटशेल व्हेन वी समराइज कॉस्ट अकाउंटिंग, इट्स अ प्रोसेस. इस प्रोसेस क्या होता है, जिसमें हम इनपुट लेते हैं. प्रोसेस इज अ टर्म व्हिच इज बीइंग यूज्ड टू डिफाइन, टू कन्वर्ट एन इनपुट इनटू आउटपुट. जब हम कोई चीज लेते हैं, इनपुट मीन्स हमारे पास कोई रसीद आई, मटेरियल आया, तो कॉस्ट अकाउंटिंग के जो मेरे इनपुट्स होते हैं वो उसकी रसीद हो गई, और उसका आउटपुट होता है मेरी कॉस्ट स्टेटमेंट्स एंड कॉस्ट रिकॉर्ड्स. सो इट्स अ प्रोसेस ऑफ आइडेंटिफिकेशन, क्लासिफिकेशन, मेजरमेंट एंड असाइनमेंट ऑफ कॉस्ट टू वेरियस कॉस्ट ऑब्जेक्ट्स. Preparation and presentation of cost record and cost statements as per cost accounting standard. Now, I just now discussed about the cost accounting standards. The cost accounting standards क्या है मेरे? These are the general guidelines which are laid by ICAI, the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. Now, these are the guidelines, these are the standards around which our cost records have to be maintained. How these records will be maintained, how the audits has to be performed, what type of controls has to be exercised, what all precaution has to be taken. It's all defined over there. We'll go and talk about that. And whose responsibility is to maintain the cost records and following this process is the responsibility of company's management team. Okay. Now, costing does what? What the use of costing? Costing drives efficiency and economy in the company by efficient use of resources. When we talk about, let's say, the financial accounting objective is different. What's the objective of costing? Costing is not only for the record maintenance, the costing is done with the objective of driving the efficiency and economy in the company by using the resources efficiently. How? By providing minimum labor and material and getting the full capacity of machine output. It means optimum utilization of resources. Yes. So hence, a cost accountant is focused solely and mainly with the internal economy of the industry. उनका cost accountant का focus किसके ऊपर है कि किस तरीके से हम अपने resources को most efficiently use करेंगे और अपनी cost को नीचे से कम रखेंगे and render the services essentially on a day-to-day management for the undertaking purpose. Yani helping management to keep the cost low. Now, costing is low is very good for business to survive. So, it's very important for us to understand when we talk about what the cost audits and management audit, these cost audits are around my costing. So, what is basically a costing is it's a process of identification, classification, and assignment to various cost objects, preparing records and statements as per costing standards, and then costing's aim is to drive the resources efficiently. Any questions till this stage you want me to explain further? Okay, now I move on to the next slide. Now we'll talk about for the nature of cost audit. What's the nature of the cost audit? How this is different from the financial audits? आपने सुना होगा कि इस कंपनी का ऑडिट चल रहा है. Every audit has an objective. उसका एक पर्पस होता है. Now, what is the purpose of the cost audit? Cost audit क्यों किया जाता है? What is a cost audit? It's a system of audit introduced by Government of India for review and examination and appraisal of the cost accounting records. And attendant information required to be maintained by specified industries. अब गवर्नमेंट हैज स्पेसिफाइड, गवर्नमेंट ने स्पेसिफाई किया हुआ है इंडस्ट्रीज को दो पार्ट में, रेगुलेटेड and non-regulated industries. Now, the part of the regulated industries and non-regulated companies is already defined in the standard also. We'll go and discuss that later. Some of the regulated industries वो होती है जैसे डिफेंस है जिसमें गवर्नमेंट का रेगुलेशन है, ट्राई की गाइडलाइंस है, टेलीकम्युनिकेशन है. Non-regulated industry जहाँ पे इस तरीके के इंटरवेंशन नहीं है. We'll go, there is a list. We'll go and talk about that. So what is the cost audit? It's being defined by ICAI, that is Institute of Cost Accountants, that it's a system of audit introduced by Government of India to review, examination, appraisal of cost accounting records and statements, the information which is being maintained. What's basically a cost audit? It's an independent examination. किसका examination हम कर रहे हैं? Of our cost statements, records, and related information of an entity. Now, cost accounting records. Now, our standard says एक company को क्या-क्या cost records maintain करने हैं for related to their production. It may be it is related to their material. It is related to their labors. It is related to their overheads. It's related to their machinery cost and everything. We'll go and discuss that in detail when we go and discuss about these standards. there are 24 standards being laid for this purpose, for the purpose of maintaining, for driving these cost statement, cost records, and for driving the cost audits on these records. These standards lays down how the records has to be maintained, how the cost has to be classified, how company should maintain, and what type of records, how these records should be optimized for the purpose of resource utilization. Now, these standards are good for the company to maintain the cost records and cost, and to create, to make these cost statements, जिनको records और statements बनानी है, और इसके साथ में ही उनको एक चीज और करनी है, ये ऑडिटर को भी हेल्प करता है. ऑडिटर के लिए कैसे यूजफुल है? क्योंकि यही गाइडलाइन है जिसको पढ़ के आप जाके चेक करेंगे कि उसने रिकॉर्ड्स वैसे मेंटेन किए नहीं किए. हाउ विल यू परफॉर्म ऑडिट? ऑडिट परफॉर्म कैसे होता है? ऑडिट परफॉर्म करने के लिए कैन आई से समबडी कि तुमने कॉस्ट रिकॉर्ड्स में अपनी जो है ये अच्छा नहीं लग रहा है. आई कांट से एनीथिंग आउट ऑफ ब्लू. मैं कुछ भी अपने मन से नहीं कह सकता. एवरीथिंग, देयर इज अ रेफरेंस डॉक्यूमेंट दैट इज बीइंग यूज्ड टू अंडरस्टैंड हाउ द कॉस्ट ऑडिट हैज टू बी परफॉर्म. और ये गाइडलाइन जो है हमें स्टैंडर्ड से मिलती है. सो स्टैंडर्ड ऑन कॉस्ट ऑडिटिंग प्रोवाइड गाइडेंस टू ऑडिटर through each step of the audit process with regard to the audit procedure to be followed. उसकी responsibilities क्या होंगी और उसकी reporting कैसे होगी. Now, it is driven by which act, which section of Companies Act? Section 148 of Companies Act empowers central government to specify the audit terms of items of the cost in terms of certain companies. जैसे मैंने आपको बताया था, regulated और non regulated जो companies हैं हमारी, उनके ऊपर गवर्नमेंट ने डिफाइन किया हुआ है कि उनके किस किस आइटम के आप ऑडिट करेंगे, कौन कौन से उसके ऊपर पेट्रोलियम प्रोडक्ट्स कवर्ड है, आपके टेलीकॉम के प्रोडक्ट्स हैं, आपकी सर्विसेज कवर्ड है. तो आप कौन कौन सी चीजें हैं जो कॉस्ट ऑडिट के परव्यू में आता है, विच ऑल आइटम्स आर कवर्ड विद इन द परव्यू ऑफ कॉस्ट ऑडिट्स. एंड व्हाट हैपेंस इफ दीज प्रोविजंस आर नॉट फॉलोड बाय अ कंपनी? This is only to understand the significance. I'm talking about this to understand why this is important. Because it's a punishable offense if there is a default by the company, and it's a punishable offense also for the auditor of the company who defaults in following the procedure of the cost audits. And for company, if they do not maintain, or they maintain the wrong records for this. So the cost audit is what? Cost audit is more driven as a requirement of government. It's a statutory requirement to maintain the records and then to perform the cost audits. It is cost audit. Can anybody perform the cost audit? No. Can I invite anybody to perform the cost audit for my company? No. There is a procedure being laid out. How will you identify your cost auditor? How you have to intimate about the hiring and for the appointment of cost auditor also. So it's an independent examination. The way it is being done for the financial audit, similar procedure is being followed for the cost auditor also. So we have to appoint our cost auditor. Now something about the cost accounting standards. Time and again मैं बार बार ही cost accounting standards के बारे में कह रहा हूँ, तो इसलिए my entire cost audit is around cost accounting standards only. मैं ऑडिट करूंगा तो ऑडिट करते टाइम मुझे स्टैंडर्ड्स पता होने चाहिए. अगर मुझे स्टैंडर्ड नहीं पता तो मैं ऑडिट नहीं कर सकता. स्टैंडर्ड्स आर बेसिकली माय बाइबल. इट्स अ, ये मेरा वो डॉक्यूमेंट है जिसको पढ़ के, मेरी रूल बुक है जिसमें पढ़ के मुझे पता चलेगा कि कहाँ पे क्या लिखा है एंड हाउ द कंपनी, व्हाट अ कंपनी इज सपोज्ड टू फॉलो. Now, a brief introduction, something like cost audits. What are these standards? these are basically commonly accepted practices, procedure and requirements into a document called standard. अब स्टैंडर्ड में क्या क्या कवर्ड है आपका? It will cover your accepted practices कि मैं क्या करूंगा. एक मटेरियल अगर मेरे पास आता है एंड मटेरियल के लिए मैं उसकी अकाउंटिंग किस तरीके से करूंगा. There are already accepted practice for this. What procedure I have to follow and requirement into the document. उससे रिलेटेड रिक्वायरमेंट जो है सारी की सारी मेरी स्टैंडर्ड में डॉक्यूमेंटेड है. तो ये जब मेरी प्रैक्टिस प्रोसीजर रिक्वायरमेंट्स are translated in a form of a document, it is called standard. The practice, procedure, principles related to cost accounting are covered in cost accounting standard, and practice, procedure and requirements related to cost accounting are covered in standard in cost auditing. So we have a standard on cost auditing which helps us to perform the cost audits. Now, how these cost accounting auditors help standards help the cost auditor? ये cost auditor के लिए किस तरीके से important है? It serves as a supporter. इससे help मिलती है. Controller to control the activities and best help desk for the cost auditor. Cost auditor को audit करते time it will help as a supporter. उसको किसी से पूछने की जरूरत नहीं है. For any document, if somebody has any ambiguity, कोई discussion है उससे related, excuse me, you have to open your standard, read, and then you have to discuss with your auditee that what is written there. They are the best controller. It means it's an interpretation which matters of a standard. उसमें लिखा क्या है and how I understand, how do I perform the audit. It helps to control those activities. You cannot go, no auditor, no company can cross those boundaries. It's a best help desk. In the kind of any type of queries, it helps you to understand that. It answers all your queries. Now, how this helps the cost auditor? It helps in streamlining audit. How he can plan his audit. कैसे प्लानिंग करने के लिए? He need to define the scope of audit. कि मेरे को क्या क्या इसमें इंक्लूड करना है. Looking at the business of a company, it helps him to do the audit planning. He can do the better documentation, looking at the size of the company, the nature of operation, looking at the standard. वो स्टैंडर्ड देखने के बाद में उसको क्या उसको प्लान करने में हेल्प करता है. उसकी डॉक्यूमेंटेशन इंप्रूव करने में, क्योंकि उसमें डिफाइन किया हुआ है कि कॉस्ट ऑडिटर को कौन कौन सी रिपोर्ट बनानी है, कौन कौन सी क्या फॉर्मेट यूज करना है, उसको किस तरीके से इंप्लीमेंट करना है. तो इट हेल्प्स हिम इन द इंटायर ऑडिट प्रोसेस. What helps? Overall quality of audit. Standards say it helps to improve the overall quality of audit. Cost audit के लिए आपको इतने ही एस्पेक्ट नहीं है, इसमें और भी बहुत सारी चीजें हैं. Where it helps you in a form of seeking clarification. कहीं पे बैठ के अगर कोई डिबेट है related to any item, how the treatment of an item has to happen. So standard helps you to take a decision on this. These are the documented rules and guidelines to enforce audit findings. It's a kind of a document. ये वो document है जिससे आपको ये पता चलेगा which helps you to enforce your audit findings. Nobody can debate. If it is written in a standard that material related records has to be maintained in this format, and these are the 4 ways to classify a cost and a material. Let's say it has to be work in progress, it has to be raw material. How you have to classify your inventory? Inventory may be classified in a form of the raw material, it may be work in progress, it may be finished goods. So it talks about the classification of inventory, it talks about classification of material, it talks about the classification of the expenses. So in case if you find any observation, these are the documented rules that support those audit findings. What take the auditor has on this? cost auditor should carefully go through the standard and should read how these standards are important. उसके लिए उसको क्या precaution लेने? You should carefully go through the standard and should read the objective of the independent audit. हम क्यों कर रहे हैं? And then take the understanding of business. क्योंकि once I understand the standard, we need to understand how this applies to my business. जो मेरी ऑडिटिंग कंपनी है उसका बिजनेस क्या है. Now standard talks about your petroleum products, it talks about your telecoms related services, it talks about your education related things, it talks about your manufacturing industry, it talks about your defense related items. हर तरीके के बिजनेस के बारे में. So one need to understand the standard, then he has to take the understanding of the business. कि इस बिजनेस में मेरी कौन कौन सी प्रोसेसेस है और उन प्रोसेसेस का मेरा स्टैंडर्ड में रिक्वायरमेंट क्या है. सो माय कॉस्ट ऑडिट्स, आर यू एबल टू कोरिलेट नाउ व्हाई आई एम स्ट्रेसिंग सो मच ऑन द स्टैंडर्ड्स. स्टैंडर्ड्स क्यों जरूरी है? क्योंकि मेरा पूरा कॉस्ट ऑडिट स्टैंडर्ड्स के ऊपर बेस्ड है. इट्स अ रेफरेंस डॉक्यूमेंट दैट डिफाइंस द स्कोप कि कितना कहां से शुरू होकर कहां पे खत्म होगा ये. So then the process understanding helps to understand in the nature of business क्या है. ये manufacturing company है. Now they are making a consumer goods. अब consumer goods बनाते हैं, that is in the form of let's say they are making a refrigerator, they are making any electronic items. So it goes to which category and what all my cost accounting records that need to be maintained. It will help him to plan how he can identify from the standard which all activities are there, what all record the company is supposed to maintain, because standard में तो सब कुछ लिखा हुआ है. You need to identify for the company's business what all records related requirements are applicable, what are my formats, what are my other kind of documentation related requirement, how the classification applies and all these things, my requirements. Once he knows about this, then he can do the planning of the audit. Planning of the audit is important considering the standard and the business. Then he can understand that, okay, now for this business, I need to perform the audit on these my set of 40 activities. ये 40 चीजें मुझे करनी है. Now for these 40 things, now I need to make my plan. I have 4 days to perform audit. I have 1 week to perform audit. How much time I can allocate? So it helps him to do the planning. Also perform audit and then complete documentation. It helps him, provides him the formats and other details. Now, standard shares brief detail of the applicable standard with the client and discuss. As I told you, when we start with the audit, we need to inform client about the applicability of the standard. Let's say the way I gave you an example, जैसा मैंने आपको अभी बताया कि client जो है consumer goods में industry में है. अब consumer goods industry में let's say they are making electronic products like TV, refrigerator, microwave, something like that. अब क्लाइंट को आपको बताना पड़ेगा ऑडिट के टाइम पे कि आपको स्टैंडर्ड कौन सा एप्लीकेबल है, जो मेरा कॉस्टिंग स्टैंडर्ड है इसमें कौन कौन सी टर्म्स एप्लीकेबल है, और उनके साथ डिस्कस करोगे. इट हेल्प्स टू प्लान. यू नीड टू अप्राइज क्लाइंट. दे शुड नॉट फील कि यार ये तो कहीं से भी. इट हेल्प्स हिम टू अंडरस्टैंड द रिक्वायरमेंट. ऑडिटर ये क्यों कह रहा है. Use a standard to an extent that they are applicable to the nature and the scope of audit. Standard authorizes the cost auditor to use the work of another auditor. Now, standard doesn't say that everything has to be done by the cost auditor himself. वो कहते हैं कि अगर किसी और ऑडिटर का काम और किसी और एक्सपर्ट जो कॉस्ट ऑडिटिंग एक्सपर्ट है उसको भी आप यूज कर सकते हो अगर आप उससे सेटिस्फाइड हो. अगर उसने कोई ऑडिट किया हुआ है और उसकी कोई रिपोर्ट्स अवेलेबल है, आप उसको चेक करो. Agar if you are satisfied with this, then you can go ahead and use that also. Therefore, if required and satisfied, a cost auditor can rely on the work done by another auditor and expert. Now, if a company is very big, an auditor cannot perform everything himself. A company may have used the other cost auditors also to perform the audit on their cost reports and cost statements prepared by them. तो कॉस्ट ऑडिटर को ऑडिट करते टाइम अगर कुछ ऐसे रिकॉर्ड्स और रिपोर्ट्स मिल जाती हैं जो किसी और कॉस्ट ऑडिटर ने किए हुए हैं, तो वो उनको पढ़ सकता है, देख सकता है, एंड इफ ही इज सेटिस्फाइड देन ही कैन यूज दैट आल्सो. स्टैंडर्ड्स क्या हम हमेशा याद कर सकते हैं? हाउ आई हैव टू परफॉर्म माय कॉस्ट ऑडिट. It we become expert of these standards only by practice, by making this as a part of the work culture. We learn every day about the standard by doing more and more practice, and then we we gain expertise on the subject, and then we have to train our audit team also. So cost auditing is nothing but a task where we need to not only understand the standard, but we need to understand the client business. We need to understand how this helps, how to identify the requirements applicable to my client's business, and then we have to identify where all they have already used the other cost auditor to see usse kuch where it helps to reduce the scope of my audit and some of my audit activities, and also it helps to plan and train the audit team also, because whenever we go for the audit, we have got the audit teams also. Now what are the audit teams? Audit team में आप अकेले कुछ सारे काम तो नहीं करेंगे. So what do? You assign the responsibilities that you will go and check the material aspect, you will go and check the overhead related things, you will see the cost allocation aspect, you will see, I mean, likewise we assign the roles and responsibilities, and to our audit team we need to go and train them on these standards also. So what we have discussed till now is about the costing, which is a process of converting it's a process of creating maintaining our cost records, and then preparing our cost statements. And then we understood about the cost standards, cost accounting standards, how these standards are helpful for the audit, what all information we gain from the cost accounting standards, और ये स्टैंडर्ड किस तरीके से कंपनी के लिए और ऑडिटर के लिए important है. Because a cost auditor cannot go beyond these standards. So इससे cost auditor को क्या help मिलती है? We have discussed this. Now we have discussed also about this, how this helps in audit planning, और टीम को ट्रेन करने की क्यों जरूरत है. Now I think till now we have discussed couple of things. You want me to take up some questions? Okay, you can open your mic, please.
Yes, sir. Please take some questions.
Hello. Hello.
Sir, please take some questions.
Sorry, come again. I can't hear you.
Sir, can you please take some questions now?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, till at this stage, अभी तक जो हमने डिस्कस किया है इससे रिलेटेड कुछ क्वेश्चन है, कोई क्लैरिटी चाहिए तो then I'm taking a pause here. So you people can come and ask me. You want me to wait or shall we move on?
Please move ahead.
We can move forward.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Now, something related to cost audits. It's a very first class, so we'll be talking about some introduction. This is very important for us. A beginning is very important. Beginning helps us to plan everything. I mean, it helps us not only as a subject like cost audits, but we also need to understand how this applies to my whole learning. अभी तक मैंने कॉस्टिंग पढ़ी है, अभी तक मैंने कॉस्ट अकाउंटिंग रिकॉर्ड्स के बारे में पढ़ा है. अब कॉस्ट ऑडिट के रिकॉर्ड्स और रूल्स किस तरीके से ऑडिट हो रहे हैं. नाउ फाइनेंशियल ऑडिट यू वुड हैव हर्ड के आज की डेट में आपने न्यूज़पेपर्स में भी बहुत पढ़ा होगा. कॉस्ट ऑडिट्स के बारे में आपने कितना पढ़ा है? आई रियली डोंट नो, बहुत कम छपेगा. बट मेरा कहने बट at this point of time, we need to understand what are my reference documents for cost audits. एक कॉस्ट ऑडिटर के लिए कहाँ से उसका काम शुरू होता है, कौन कौन से रिकॉर्ड्स वो ऑडिट करने, और किस तरीके से ऑडिट की प्लानिंग हो रही है, क्यों ये शुरू हुआ. दिस इंट्रोडक्शन इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. When as we move forward, we'll be talking about cost accounting standards, we'll be talking about maintenance of record, we'll be talking about these things, couple of more things. But cost audit मैंने क्यों शुरू किया, कहाँ से इसका ओरिजिनेशन है, किस तरीके की रिक्वायरमेंट्स है, किस तरीके का ऑडिट है. एज आई टोल्ड यू, इट्स मैंडेटेड बाय गवर्नमेंट. It's a statutory audit. It's not something like internal audit. Internal audit are basically driven by the choice of company. एक कंपनी अपने आप खुद डिसाइड करती है कि मेरे को अपने इंटरनल ऑडिट कराने. Now internal audit can be performed on my financial records, also on my cost records. But ये जो मेरे cost audits हैं, these are driven by section 148, which is mandated by government. कि वो तो उस कंपनी को कराने ही कराने, और कौन कौन सी कंपनी के लिए कितने दिन कराना है वो अभी हम आके डिस्कस करें. So how we started with cost audits. अब जब फाइनेंशियल ऑडिट हो रही तो कॉस्ट ऑडिट कराने की क्या जरूरत थी? Why we started with this? So what happened in mid 50s of our previous century? Many corporate frauds took place. अब ये आपने आजकल भी सुना होगा कुछ फ्रॉड्स हो रहे हैं, जैसे अभी सत्यम के फ्रॉड हुए. मिड 50s में भी कुछ डालमिया के फ्रॉड थे, कुछ हुए. और फिर गवर्नमेंट ने कुछ कमीशंस उन फ्रॉड्स के आने के बाद में, नाउ गवर्नमेंट टेक्स एक्शन. How to counter these frauds, how to avoid them, what type of controls we can exercise on these type of frauds. धीरे से कंटिन्यू रहेंगे. तो इसका मतलब है जो मेरे एग्जिस्टिंग कंट्रोल्स हैं वो सारे के सारे बाईपास हो गए, या वो कंट्रोल ढंग से इंप्लीमेंट नहीं हुए. तो गवर्नमेंट ने 2 कमीशन अपॉइंट किए थे, एक विवियन बोस और एक दत्ता कमीशन, और एक कमेटी अपॉइंट की थी, शास्त्री कमेटी, डी शास्त्री कमेटी. And these commission and committee observed the inadequacies in existing system. Inadequacies का मतलब है उसमें क्या क्या कमियां है मेरे existing system में of financial accounting and audit. और उस समय के मेरे corporate disclosures में, क्योंकि उस समय मेरे cost audits नहीं थे. So that time these financial audit were giving a lot of type of corporate frauds, where the government felt कि इससे तो this control is not good enough. So the commission and committees observed inadequacies. उनको नजर आई कि our existing systems are not strong enough to detect every type of problem. So they identified a need for the cost audits. They recommended a more effective system of cost accounting and cost audits to supplement financial accounting and auditing practice. Now, cost audit is not to replace financial audit, or financial audit can replace cost audit, but it is to supplement financial audits and auditing practices. It is now focus of cost audit is different from the focus of the financial audit. We'll talk about that also. Initial phase में क्या हुआ था कि there was an acute shortage of goods and materials. जो हमारे पास रॉ मटेरियल था, जो हमारे पास रिसोर्सेस है, लेबर है या फाइनेंशियल रिसोर्सेस है, उसकी भी शॉर्टेज है. क्या फाइनेंशियल ऑडिट में उसके ऊपर फोकस है? मे बी नॉट. सो मैकेनिज्म ऑफ कॉस्ट ऑडिट केम अप. इट अ नीड वाज फेल्ट, इसकी जरूरत महसूस हुई कि वी हैव टू have a cost audit, a mechanism of cost audit. A cost audit का mechanism was being developed where maintenance of the structured cost data were considered as important instrument in the hand of regulated industries authorities. उन्होंने क्या किया कि एक structured cost data बनाया which became as an instrument in the hand of regulated authorities. Regulated authorities means government bodies who empower the cost auditor. Now cost auditor कैसे अपॉइंट होगा अभी हम उसको डिस्कस करेंगे. To monitor, control and regulate the efficient use of scarce resources and inputs so made available and monitor the cost of production and administer prices. So the focus of the cost audit is what? Is on efficient use of scarce resources. जो हमारा costing में था, cost accountant का focus फाइनेंशियल कंट्रोल्स के अलावा यहाँ पर क्या है एफिशिएंट यूज ऑफ स्कैर रिसोर्सेज. उन्होंने कहा यार जो हमारे पास मार्केट में जो अभी जो हमारे पास में रिसोर्सेज कोई पेट्रोलियम प्रोडक्ट्स है और इफ यू टॉक अबाउट एनी रॉ मटेरियल व्हिच इज अवेलेबल इन द मार्केट, how companies are using this as an input, are they using this efficiently, is a part of the cost audit. Monitor the cost of production. किसी कंपनी के कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन हाई होने से इट इज नॉट अ लॉस फॉर दैट कंपनी. जिस कंपनी का कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन बढ़ गया है उसका वो कंपनी के लिए लॉस नहीं है. इट्स अ लॉस फॉर द गवर्नमेंट, इट्स अ लॉस फॉर द सोसाइटी, क्योंकि वो सोसाइटी से फ्रॉम गवर्नमेंट के जो रिसोर्सेज है, जो मेरे स्केयर रिसोर्सेज है, लेट्स से वी पिक अप एग्जांपल ऑफ कंपनी व्हिच इज प्रोड्यूसिंग लेट्स से द क्लोथ्स which is using let's say the cotton. Now a raw cotton comes in a very let's say I'm assuming we are taking a hypothetical example कि उसकी scarcity है, वो नहीं है easily available market में, ये petroleum products कम easily available है. Now the company is not using them efficiently, so what happens, the cost of production goes up and then it leads to the price rise. तो एक तो वी आर एग्जॉस्टिंग द स्केयर रिसोर्सेस, उसको वेस्ट किया, जितना प्रोडक्शन होना चाहिए था उतना नहीं हुआ. नाउ व्हाट दैट लेड टू, इट इंक्रीज माय कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन. अब मैं कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन इंक्रीज होने से क्या हुआ कि मेरे प्राइसेस बढ़ गए. नाउ इट्स अ डैमेज नॉट ओनली टू माय रिसोर्सेस बट इट आल्सो इंक्रीजेस माय कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन. प्राइसेस हाई होगी और कंज्यूमर को भी चीजें अवेलेबल नहीं है सही प्राइसेस में. It's a kind of multi-head monster where it's not damaging one way, it's damaging in different ways. इसको बहुत सारे नुकसान हो रहे हैं. मेरे एक रिसोर्सेज भी जो स्कैर रिसोर्सेज वो ढंग से यूज नहीं हो रहे. मेरे जो कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन बन रहा है, कंज्यूमर उन गुड्स को यूज ही नहीं कर सकते जो बहुत महंगे हो जाएंगे. So this is how cost audit emerges as a unique feature of the corporate management in India. तो अभी क्या आइडेंटिफाई किया गया कि अभी हमको जो है कॉर्पोरेट मैनेजमेंट के लिए कॉस्ट ऑडिट की जरूरत है. तो हाउ डू वी गो अबाउट द कॉस्ट ऑडिट्स? कॉस्ट ऑडिटिंग का अब नाउ आई रियली डोंट नो व्हाट इंप्रेशन यू हैड अबाउट द कॉस्ट ऑडिट. आप कॉस्ट ऑडिट से क्या समझे थे? फाइनेंशियल ऑडिट का फोकस कहाँ पे था, बट अभी मेरा जो कॉस्ट ऑडिट का फोकस है वो कहाँ पर है? कॉस्ट ऑडिट का फोकस मेरा सिर्फ इसमें नहीं है कि उन्होंने रिकॉर्ड उस फॉर्मेट में बनाए नहीं बनाए हैं या उनको जो क्लासिफिकेशन ऑफ गुड्स किया नहीं किया है. इट्स आल्सो फोकस ऑन दी मैनेजमेंट यूटिलाइजेशन ऑफ रिसोर्सेज. कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन किस तरीके से कंट्रोल की गई है, दिस इज वेयर द फोकस ऑफ द कॉस्ट ऑडिट कम्स. सो अभी जो मैं बोल रहा हूँ बिटवीन हिंदी एंड इंग्लिश, आई बिलीव अभी मेरे को किसी ने बीच में प्रॉम्प्ट किया था हिंदी में बोलने के लिए. आई होप इट्स ओके विद दैट जेंटलमैन. आई थिंक ये उनके लिए ठीक है. अगर कहीं पे कुछ समझ में नहीं आ रहा है तो प्लीज फील फ्री, आप प्लीज मुझसे सवाल पूछ सकते हैं स्पीकर ऑन करके. ओके, थैंक यू. अगर कहीं पे कोई टर्म आपको एक्सप्लेन नहीं हो रहा है, इट्स अ प्रोफेशनल कोर्स, प्लीज फील फ्री एंड आस्क मी. I'll explain. I'll be more than happy to explain you. Because there is no purpose to go ahead like this unless until you understand the what I'm saying. और कहीं पे but language is not a barrier. हाँ, language is only a mode of communication. Now, when we perform the cost audits, what were the objectives of the cost audits? Cost audits में करता क्यों? Is this only to check the compliance? कि गवर्नमेंट ने बोला मुझे ऑडिट करना है इसलिए मुझे ऑडिट करने? Is this for that reason only? Let's understand the objectives of the cost audits. कि मेरी compliance है, गवर्नमेंट ने कहा है कि नहीं, आपका 50 करोड़ से ऊपर का टर्नओवर है या आपके इतनी कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन है. Now you people have to undergo the audits. Is this the one requirement because of which we have to do the audits? Is this my only objective of the cost audits? To comply with it? Yes, it is one of the objectives. What are the other objectives that we have in place? It checks periodical reconciliation between my cost account and financial accounts. Now, there are two set of records being maintained. एक मेरे cost accounts records होते हैं, एक मेरे financial accounts records हैं. Now, cost audits के केस में हम क्या करते हैं, दोनों का reconciliation होता है periodical. It may be monthly, it may be quarterly, it may be half yearly, as per the need. Now, why do we perform these reconciliation? These reconciliations are important to check the controls. ये नहीं होना चाहिए कि मेरे cost records में तो cost बहुत हाई जा रही है लेकिन financial records में हम उसको कम दिखा रहे हैं, और vice versa. So the objective of the cost audit is not only on this, but it is also on my cost accounts and financial accounts. उसका reconciliation. As we discussed just now, evaluate optimum utilization of human, physical and financial resources of enterprise. Cost audit का objective सिर्फ गवर्नमेंट की compliance नहीं है, इसमें हमें ये देखना है not only scarce resources can be scarce resources, can be my human resources also. How my human resources are scarce? When we talk about some of the skilled resources, for example, कुछ एक मेरी खास इंडस्ट्रीज होती हैं जहाँ पे स्किल बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट होता है. Let's say especially in handicraft, or when we talk about some of the industries like I can talk about it this way for my software also, जहाँ पे बैठ के जो कोडिंग करते हैं या जो ऑडिटिंग कर रहे हैं, मतलब for any area you go there is specialization is required. डॉक्टर है, हॉस्पिटल इंडस्ट्री है, वहाँ पे जो एक डॉक्टर है उसका जो एक हार्ट सर्जन है या जो न्यूरो सर्जन है उसकी जो हाईली स्किल्ड है, तो how do we utilize the human resources, their cost? Is this something are we using them efficiently? Cost audits and cost account focuses on that. It's about the physical and financial resources. So when we talk about this, are we really talking about only the human resources, physical resources like raw material, मेरे overheads है, खर्चे हैं, but also about the financial resources, मेरी working capital requirement है. Financial resources in terms of मैंने loan लेके अपने operation चला रहा हूँ, तो is this really helping me out? Cost audit helps us to check the optimum utilization. कहीं तो नहीं, we compare with the intercompany records also कि same cost में उनका प्रोडक्शन क्या है, सेम कॉस्ट में इस कंपनी का प्रोडक्शन क्या है. That's also one of the way to check the optimum utilization. Or you can do the inter-period comparisons also. Now, what are the inter-period comparison? I compare with my last quarter. I compare with my last half year. I compare with my last year. This is how we check the efficient utilization of my financial resources, my human resources, and my physical resources. Next, detection and correction of abnormal losses of material and time. Now, cost audits focus is also on detection and correction of abnormal losses of material and time. When we maintain the cost records, that time we need to capture the details of our abnormal loss. Now, abnormal loss, normal loss, you would have read in our costing. कि हम उसमें क्या कहते हैं, नॉर्मल लॉस कितना है, एबनॉर्मल लॉस कितना है. A normal loss is a part of my production process that is within my acceptable limits. Now, अगर कहीं पे कोई abnormal loss अगर आ रहा है, material means utilization of my material, raw material, my work in progress, जो भी मेरा input है, let's say for oil, whatever electricity it could be, which is basically an input for the production. So it's about the detection and then correction also. It's not only कि मैंने डिटेक्ट किया और डिटेक्ट तो करके रख लिया, लेकिन 6 महीने तक उसके ऊपर कोई एक्शन नहीं है. तो कॉस्ट ऑडिट ऑब्जेक्टिव इज, क्या कंपनी उसको ठीक टाइम पे डिटेक्ट कर रही है, उनके यहाँ कोई एबनॉर्मल लॉसेस थे मटेरियल के और टाइम के भी. नाउ व्हाट आर द एबनॉर्मल लॉसेस रिलेटेड टू टाइम? नाउ एबनॉर्मल लॉसेस रिलेटेड टू टाइम मे अराइज, ये तब उस सिचुएशन में हो सकता है जबकि मेरे जो मैन पावर है उसका प्रोडक्शन कम हो गया है. I mean, मेरी लेबर कॉस्ट बढ़ गई. अब मेरी लेबर कॉस्ट कैसे बढ़ गई? My labor cost may increase when my labor's waiting time is more. Now, why their waiting time is more? Because they do not have resources to work on. अब उनका मटेरियल नहीं आ रहा है, सो इस वजह से उनका क्या हुआ, एबनॉर्मल लॉस हो गया टाइम. और ड्यू टू द डैमेज ऑफ माई मशीनरी, मेरी मशीनरी डाउन हो गई, डैमेज हो गई, अब उसके रिपेयर में टाइम लग गया, 2 दिन लग गए. It's a abnormal loss. So during cost audit, we detect was there some abnormal losses of material and in time, and were these being corrected? Corrective action लिया नहीं लिया उसको fix करने के लिए, detect करके छोड़ दिया. Now, apart from this, what we have to discuss, cost audit is also focus के यार जो हमने देखा है, is the company inculcating the culture of cost consciousness? Now, what is cost consciousness? Now, company tries to control cost. अपने यहाँ वो कॉस्ट को कम करने की कोशिश करती है. कॉन्शियसनेस मीन्स लोगों के बीच में अवेयरनेस क्रिएट करना. नाउ इट इज अ पार्ट ऑफ कल्चर. हाउ दिस इज अ पार्ट ऑफ कंपनीज कल्चर? दे हैव वेरियस टाइप ऑफ प्रोग्राम्स बीइंग लॉन्च्ड. वो अलग अलग किस्म के प्रोग्राम्स लॉन्च करते हैं, इनिशिएटिव्स लेते हैं कि नाउ फॉर माई दिस पर्टिकुलर डिपार्टमेंट अब प्रोसेस ए बी सी, एक कंपनी का एक मटेरियल 3 प्रोसेसेस में तैयार होता है. प्रोसेस ए is provides input to process B. Process B processes something on that what they receive from process A. They perform certain activities on this and then they give it as it's a output of process B but input for process C. And process C eventually works on that and then gives this as a final product for the sale. Now, cost consciousness is, now process A, B, C, they have their cost already being defined. कौन सी मेरी प्रोसेस या कौन सा मेरे डिपार्टमेंट जो है अपनी कॉस्ट को कंट्रोल कर रहा है? इज दिस देयर कॉस्ट इज गोइंग अप अगले क्वार्टर में या अगले 6 मंथ्स में, क्या उनकी कॉस्ट बढ़ गई है? मे बी बढ़ सकती है. नाउ अब वो क्यों बढ़ेगी? Now it could increase due to multiple factors where my employees within the organization there is no culture of the cost consciousness. हम अपने घर में भी बैठ कर कॉस्ट कंट्रोल करते हैं, नहीं यार ये खर्चा ज्यादा हो रहा है, we should not be extravagant. So the culture of cost consciousness helps us to control that. So the focus is to control cost at the department level, motivate team. It's a kind of the culture we inculcate. और culture कैसे inculcate करते हैं? By identifying, taking certain initiatives within the department. Department में देखते हैं ये this particular department has reduced their cost. I can share one example with you. जो अभी मैंने बीच में एक कंपनी में हमारी मीट की थी, मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कंपनी की, मैंने वहाँ देखा था. And that gentleman shared the experience कि उनके यहाँ उनका कॉस्ट बहुत बढ़ रही थी. तो उन लोगों ने क्या किया, अपने डिपार्टमेंट में एक इनिशिएटिव लॉन्च किया और उन्होंने अपने यहाँ कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन को कम किया थ्रू सम ऑटोमेशन. उन्होंने अपने यहाँ कुछ इनिशिएटिव्स लिए. सो द कल्चर ऑफ कॉस्ट कॉन्शियसनेस इज नॉट ओनली अबाउट कि यार कॉस्ट बढ़ रही है, बट ऑल्सो टू कंट्रोल कॉस्ट एंड देन फाइंडिंग वेज टू कंट्रोल द कॉस्ट ऑल्सो. Now, another thing is when we talk about it's a statutory requirement, we verify the cost accounts and records. Are those being maintained as specified by standard? Not only we need to maintain them, but we need to maintain them and upgrade them at regular intervals. It should not happen that I'm updating my cost reports only once in a month. So it has to be continuous process. They should be properly maintained. और जो हमारे cost accounting standards तो है ही हैं. Every organization has their cost accounting system also. Now standard में एक ऑब्जेक्टिव दिया हुआ है कि आपको रिकॉर्ड मेंटेन करने इस तरीके से करने हैं. अब हर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन अपने यहाँ एक कॉस्ट अकाउंटिंग सिस्टम बनाता है. कॉस्ट अकाउंटिंग सिस्टम ऑफ एन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन is basically it's a system which is a mix of a cost accounting standards and their cost accounting policies which are based on standards. Now to further refine and implement those standard guidelines efficiently within the organization, अब स्टैंडर्ड को मैंने अपने यहाँ efficiently implement करना है, तो मैं क्या करूंगा? तो हम उसको सिंप्लीफाई करते हैं, अपने यहाँ ऑर्गेनाइजेशन कॉस्ट अकाउंटिंग सिस्टम बनाते हैं. और सिस्टम में क्या बनाते हैं? कॉस्ट अकाउंटिंग पॉलिसीज बनाते हैं. पॉलिसीज कैसी होगी? मटेरियल से रिलेटेड. कि वो नाउ ऑल मटेरियल व्हिच इज बीइंग रिसीव्ड शुड बी सेंट फॉर द प्रोडक्शन, शुड बी मेड अवेलेबल टू प्रोडक्शन विद इन 2 आवर्स. 2 घंटे के अंदर प्रोडक्शन टीम के पास पहुंचाना चाहिए. ये पॉलिसी बना दी, कंट्रोल्स बना दिए. अब ये नहीं है कि जो प्रोडक्शन है अगर वो सप्लाई टीम से अगर कोई चीज मटेरियल मांग रहा है, जो स्टोर डिपार्टमेंट है, तो वो स्टोर डिपार्टमेंट को उसको प्रोडक्शन टीम को कितनी देर में मटेरियल प्रोवाइड करना है. तो इस तरीके की इंटरनल प्रोसेसेस डिफाइन होती है. दिस इज कॉल्ड अ काइंड ऑफ द इंटरनल अकाउंटिंग सिस्टम. इट्स अबाउट द कॉस्ट अकाउंटिंग सिस्टम. आप उसकी कॉस्ट किस तरीके से एलोकेट करोगे. नाउ समथिंग रिलेटेड टू इलेक्ट्रिसिटी, कॉस्ट एलोकेशन किस तरीके से होगी. It is all being defined in my cost accounting system. Now my standard may allow an organization to adopt different type of cost allocation methods. अब organization अपने यहाँ cost accounting system में elaborate करता है कि मेरे यहाँ किस तरीके से cost allocation होगी, which is acceptable as per the standard. Now, when we talk about this, अब cost accounting system में क्या हो गया मेरे? Cost accounting system में मेरे, now we are trying to implement my standard in an efficient manner through the use of my internal procedures, my internal guidelines, my internal policies, costing related policies. कि उसका ट्रीटमेंट कैसे होगा, कॉस्ट एलोकेशन कैसी होगी, इंप्लीमेंटेशन कैसे होगा, रिकॉर्ड्स कैसे मेंटेन होंगे. दिस ऑल रिलेटेड टू माय कॉस्ट अकाउंटिंग सिस्टम. Now there is a new term. Now we'll be talking about the cost accounting record rules. Now standard talks about my what all has to be done, कौन से रिकॉर्ड मेंटेन करने, क्या, now what is the frequency, how, which all product this is applicable to, how cost auditor will be appointed. But cost accounting record rules, now what are the cost accounting record rules? Now these are the rules which are related to my cost accounting records. Am I audible to everybody?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So in between it is important. So my cost accounting record rules are basically a set of rules that talks about related to my cost records. Records मेरे costing से related records के ऊपर rules है कि मेरी material से related record कैसे maintain होगा, मेरे overhead से related record कैसे maintain होगा, मेरे कॉस्ट के अलग अलग जो हेड्स हैं, मेरी वर्क इन प्रोग्रेस अकाउंट्स हैं, मेरे जो भी फिनिश गुड्स से रिलेटेड अकाउंट्स हैं, वो कैसे मेंटेन होंगे, कितनी फ्रीक्वेंटली होंगे, उसको रिकॉर्ड्स के किस फॉर्मेट में आपने रखना है. इट इज ऑल डिफाइंड इन माय कॉस्ट अकाउंटिंग रिकॉर्ड बुक्स. We'll be talking about it when we move forward. Objective is just like to find out the errors in frauds. Cost audit का objective, as I told you, reconciliation, utilization of resources, but also to detect errors in frauds. How frauds happen in cost audits? Costing से related frauds कैसे होते हैं? A fraud may happen कि एक कंपनी का एक डिपार्टमेंट, कॉस्टिंग डिपार्टमेंट के ऊपर प्रेशर है कि आपकी कॉस्ट इससे ज्यादा नहीं जानी चाहिए. हर डिपार्टमेंट को प्रेशर को टारगेट्स मिलते हैं. द सेम वे इट इज फॉर द प्रोडक्शन डिपार्टमेंट, इट इज फॉर माय डिफरेंट प्रोसेस डिपार्टमेंट या आपके सपोर्ट फंक्शन जो आपके सर्विस फंक्शन है उनको भी टारगेट्स मिलते हैं. नाउ व्हाट हैपेंस इफ माय कॉस्ट इज हाई? What happens? They play with the internal systems. It might happen that certain costs are not being allocated, or certain costs are not being allocated appropriately, or certain costs are not being charged to accounts. ये गलत heads में जाके debit कर दिए. So what happens? All this leads to my cost reduction. So that what I do? It improves the profitability of my department. ये डिपार्टमेंट की कॉस्ट पिछले साल इतनी थी, अब की बारी भी इतनी है. उनको टारगेट मिला, अब की बारी तुम्हें 5% कॉस्ट कम करनी है. What do I do? I cannot reduce the consumption of my material. Then what do? I play with my overheads, and I do the wrong allocation of my overheads and reduce the cost of my departments. So there are the different ways of conducting the frauds. There may be some errors also. Errors may be a mathematical errors in calculations, in wrong postings, in anything. During cost audits, it is about the detection of errors and frauds. Now, cost audits helps how? Cost audits, now costing is not only about the efficient use of resources, but it helps an organization. एक organization को किस चीज में help करता है? It helps them to ascertain the cost per unit. Now, to ascertain a accurate cost unit, a cost allocation, costing, cost records, and everything has to be maintained nicely and accurately. And to judge the performance of a cost center कौन सा हो गया आपका? Cost center, we identify something as a cost center. We identify something as a revenue center. A cost center जहाँ पे बैठ के मेरा costing हो रही है, जहाँ मेरा production हो रहा है. Now, which does not generate any revenue. My production team, my production center, which is not selling, which is only producing, which is only incurring cost, is my cost center. Now, it helps cost audit को हम क्या कहते हैं? It helps me to verify the cost per unit and the cost center. ये cost center ढंग से मेरी accounting कर रहा है? Are there some fraud errors, or are there some errors going on? क्या मेरी cost per unit calculation is accurate? Cost audit helps to ascertain that. So, objective of the cost audit is not only to ensure compliance, what government wants or what is being mandated, but the focus of the cost audit by government when they mandate this is to check on various aspects. A synchronization between cost account and financial accounts. कि उन दोनों के बीच में मेरा reconciliation हो रहा है, उन दोनों के बीच में mismatch नहीं. Cost accounts उनको बहुत हाई दिखा रहे हैं, लेकिन financial में उन्हें कम दिखा रही है. If I want to detect any fraud, then I have to match both the things. Cost accounts provide inputs for the financial reporting also. Utilization of resources. Now, cost per unit and cost center के लिए भी it helps me to ascertain that also. Now, inventory valuation. When we talk about for the inventory valuation, what does this mean? Inventory is my opening inventory, my closing inventory, and inventory may be in different form, different classification of inventories मेरी क्या है और raw material के form में है. It may be in work in progress or it may be in finished goods form. Now checking of the inventory valuation, how inventory valuation happens? Inventory valuation happens when we use the different type of inventory valuation methods. What are my inventory valuation methods? Like LIFO, FIFO, weighted average. Or we identify a specified a particular category items. Now, for the inventory valuation methods, in a sense, let's say a company follows LIFO system. Now, when they follow a last in first out system, a last in first out system means items which are being received at last are being issued first for production purpose or for the sale purpose for use. So during cost audits, is being checked how the inventory valuation is being done. With particular inventory policy the company has adopted, it's being a part of their cost accounting system. अपने cost accounting system में वो define करते हैं कि कौन से inventory valuation method वो लोग use करेंगे for their inventory purpose, for the valuation of their inventory, different type of inventories. Now, inventory valuation को checking किस तरीके से होगी? Now, for the inventory valuation purpose, they see which particular method is being used and has that method being applied consistently. Now, what does that mean? कोई particular अगर मैंने inventory valuation method अगर कंपनी अगर यूज करी है, अगर LIFO system यूज करी है, तो क्या वो LIFO system को हर साल यूज करती है या वो LIFO से FIFO में चेंज हो गया और FIFO से weighted average में चला गया? Now, inventory valuation can really make difference on a costing of products. As a cost accountant, you would know, आप लोगों को पता ही होगा कि कॉस्टिंग में LIFO FIFO मेथड में हम अपनी कॉस्ट कैसे कंट्रोल करते हैं, प्रॉफिट्स कैसे बढ़ाते हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल, LIFO मेथड लास्ट इन फर्स्ट आउट. A company which is using a LIFO system, company will continue to use this if my pricing are falling. अब जब मार्केट में मेरे प्राइसेस गिर रहे हैं और मेरे को अपनी कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन लो रखनी है, तो जो मेरा लास्ट इन वाला प्रोडक्ट होगा सबसे सस्ता होगा. If I use that product, my cost of production is low because I'm using the inventory which is of the low cost. Whereas my stock shows the inventory of a high value, but my utilization जो मैं use कर रहा हूँ, now that's basically my LIFO system. Tomorrow the price goes high, अब price ऊपर चढ़ने शुरू हो जाते हैं. Company moves from LIFO to FIFO. Now, what happens in the case of the FIFO system? First in, first out. So my last item, which is being purchased by the company, is a costly, and my first item, which I have purchased, was of a low value. जो मैंने पहले खरीदा था वो कम पैसे का था. A company ने मार्केट की प्राइसिंग सिचुएशन के हिसाब से ना इन्वेंट्री वैल्यूएशन मेथड चेंज कर. Now, what happens with this? If this is done, my costing changes, the cost of production changes. As a cost auditor, somebody has to see what is the inventory valuation method being used by a company. कंपनी ने क्या डिफाइन किया अपना कॉस्टिंग सिस्टम में क्या यूज करेंगे और वो सिस्टम कैसे चल रहा है. अभी पिछले साल क्या था, पिछले महीने क्या था, उससे पहले क्या था, एंड नाउ व्हाट इज बीइंग यूज्ड. क्या इन्वेंटरी वैल्यूएशन मेथड हैज दैट बीन चेंज्ड, बदला गया है? इन केस इफ यस, द रीजन, क्यों बदला गया है? Now there has to be a reason for such a change, which has to be it's a change in accounting policy. It amounts to a change in accounting policy and accounting principles. which is not easy to be done. It should not be used as a medium to play with the cost. That is why cost audits के केस में it's not only cost per unit, जब हम cost per center कह रहे हैं या हम frauds कह रहे हैं, तो inventory valuation को भी checking हो रही है to check कंपनी किस तरीके से हमने इन्वेंट्री वैल्यू कर रही है, एंड उस मेथड को कंसिस्टेंटली अप्लाई करिए, उसमें चेंज हो रहे हैं, और अलग अलग प्रोडक्ट के लिए अलग अलग कौन कौन से इन्वेंट्री वैल्यूएशन मेथड यूज हो रहा है. प्रोडक्ट विच इज ऑफ अ पेरिशेबल नेचर, जो जल्दी खराब हो जाते हैं, ऐसे प्रोडक्ट्स के लिए आप लीफो सिस्टम यूज नहीं कर सकते, और ऐसे प्रोडक्ट के लिए आप बहुत लंबे समय के लिए उनके स्टोर भी नहीं कर सकते. तो प्रोडक्ट विच आर नॉट ऑफ अ पेरिशेबल नेचर, जो जल्दी खराब नहीं होते, उन प्रोडक्ट्स के लिए आप जो है you can use leaf or a FIFO depending on the pricing in the market, or whatever the company's experiences in the past on the pricing of product, on the usage of an item, that determines. So it's very important for as a cost auditor to understand the inventory valuation methods being used by a company. Now cost audits, once we know about the cost unit as a cost center, as we know, it gives us the confidence of the company to finalize the prices of the goods and services. How my costing is related to the pricing of goods and services? क्योंकि जो मेरे market में, if a company has a margin of, let's say, 10% or 5%, that margin of 5 and a 10% is applied on a cost per unit. So for the pricing of a product, goods and services, what a company does, उनके पास correct costing का होना बहुत जरूरी है. If my base, my costing of a product or a service is not correct, we can never estimate the right profits for ourselves, and we can never plan and trigger the profits and plan for take initiatives to drive our profits ahead. हम अपने profit को बढ़ाने के लिए कैसे planning करेंगे? So the cost audit objectives is also that it helps in determination of pricing goods and services. एक कंपनी में इंटरनल में तो हो रहा है, बट एक जब एक्सटर्नल ऑडिट्स होते हैं उसमें ये चीज चेक की जाती है, whatever the records are being maintained, whatever method they are using the inventory valuation, and when they finally do the costing, is that correct? And then it helps the particular company and also confidence to the management that their pricing, everything is correct, and cost audit helps to drive that. Now during cost audits, with every audit we identify certain improvement areas. Now it cannot happen that every system is best, it's a foolproof system, it cannot happen. So there will be some areas of improvement that which may be identified during the audits, और जो cost audit report होती है उसमें highlight किया जाता है management को कि these are my performance improvement areas which may be identified by looking at the operations of a company. कि यहाँ कैलकुलेशन एरर्स हो रहे हैं, यहाँ पे रिकॉर्ड्स ढंग से मेंटेन नहीं हो रहे, और रिकॉर्ड ढंग से अपडेट नहीं हो रहे, और दी एक्यूरेसी ऑफ रिकॉर्ड्स कैन नॉट बी सर्टेन्ड इजीली. आपने अपने यहाँ मैनुअल रिकॉर्डिंग सिस्टम रखा है, ऑटोमेटेड आपने अपने यहाँ ERP लगाया जिससे रिकॉर्ड्स फटाफट अपडेट हो रहे हैं. I need to look at my service departments also. मेरे इन्वेंट्री में मंथ एंड में ही जाके पता चलता है आप पीरियोडिक इन्वेंट्री सिस्टम करते हुए परपेचुअल इन्वेंट्री सिस्टम यूज कर रहे हो. In my perpetual inventory system, I can know the cost of products, I can know the cost of my inventory at any point of time. In a case of a periodic inventory system, I need to wait for a certain period to get over. Only after that I get to know about my the value of my stocks which is in hand, and also about the missing stocks when we perform the cost verification. So during the cost audits, it's the focus of the management is toward the areas of performance improvement, which is being identified by performing audits and checking of the operation records, costing statements, and also based on inter-firm comparison. Now, what are the inter-firm comparison? Inter-firm comparisons are basically when we compare within industry my costing records with the other company costing records. So my cost per unit and cost per unit within industry or of my competitor is what? Now, these days, these information is easily available. Okay, उनकी cost of production क्या जाती है? If a company is into manufacturing mobile or a company is in a manufacturing of a pen of let's say a liter of milk, what's their cost of production per unit? And what's the cost of production of my another company, my competitor? And what is the industry benchmark related to my cost, related to my utilization of my labors, my cost account. So there are certain benchmarks basis which we evaluate the performance. Now it helps us to drive corporate governance, various operational disclosures to the management. Now drives corporate governance means a company which has set up a cost accounting system, external audits like cost audits by an independent party helps the management to assess how good their internal system is, how good their cost accounting system is. Okay, internal auditor may not able to share his audit opinions that openly as independently as it can be done by an external auditor. जो internal auditor है वो क्या पता मे बी उसके पास इतनी freedom ना हो, but एक external auditor can always share a very independent opinion, very frank opinion, because he is not biased. He cannot be influenced. उसको आप affect नहीं कर सकते, उसको आप influence नहीं कर सकते. तो बहुत सारे जो आपके ऑपरेशनल डिस्क्लोजर्स हैं, लेट्स से किसी डिपार्टमेंट हेड ने लिखा है कि आपकी बड़ी बिजली चली गई थी तो इस वजह से मेरी कॉस्ट बढ़ गई, फलाने डिपार्टमेंट ने नहीं दिया, एंड दीज थिंग्स आर नॉट रीचिंग आउट टू मैनेजमेंट. सो these type of the audit, it helps to drive and assess the corporate governance and help the management to identify these areas. So as we discussed just now about the cost audit objectives, so I believe it gives you good overview about why the cost audits are happening. What the focus of the cost audit? Cost audit ये नहीं है कि सिर्फ उसने रिकॉर्ड मेंटेन किए वो इस तरीके से मेंटेन करनी गवर्नमेंट ने बोला है. This is all. That is one of the things to happen. But the objective of the cost audit is about the utilization of my resources. It's much more beyond an audit. It's an improvement exercise, which is help for the government, it's help for the company, it helps for the resources, it's help for the employees, and for driving the overall growth of the company also, and providing the goods to the consumers at a right pricing also. So any questions till now, or shall we move ahead? Any questions you want me to elaborate on any point on this slide of previous one? I shall move to the next. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you can move forward.
Okay, I expect everybody to participate, please, one by one. Otherwise,
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So something related to cost accounting standards. What we discussed right now means what is in the cost accounting standard. These standards are formulated by who? These are formulated by Cost Accounting Standard Board of India with the objective of achieving the uniformity, consistency in cost accounting principles and practices. Now, standards how helps? It helps us to write the things in a uniform manner. ये नहीं है एक company एक तरीके से बना रही है and another company is doing it in a different manner. It helps us to achieve the uniformity. And then consistency. Consistency means ये नहीं है आज के एक तरीके से कर रहा है कल दूसरे तरीके से. I give an example of inventory valuation. Company need to follow the things in a consistent manner. So standards, how standards helps is structured approach to measurement of the cost in a manufacturing or a service industry. So when we talk about for a structured approach, it talks about how we have to go about it. When we say for the structured approach, it talks about how you have to arrive at the cost per unit. It talks about how you have to classify your cost, how you have to measure your cost, how you have to move step by step towards the cost measurement. Then it talks about for the cost allocation. अभी जब हम वो standards को अभी discuss करेंगे last के 10 मिनट में, I'll give you an overview of those 24 standards and then we'll talk about it. So the purpose of this standard is to have a structured approach to measure the cost. So how standard helps? It's defining a process, it's defining a format, it's defining the steps how to go about it, and then eventually reaching at a cost. Integrate, harmonize and standardize cost accounting principles and practices. So there are the multiple, as I told you, there are many, cost accounting principle and practice prevailing. So these are standards, today there is a one practice, there is another principle which has evolved. These standards identify that which are the prevailing ones. So a standard defines which principle need to be followed. It defines how this has to be applied, how this particular principle, an accounting principle will be used. So interpretation of a principle may be different in different situations. So standards helps us to determine. Standards से हमें help मिलती है कि assess के एक accounting principle को मैं किस तरीके से apply करूँगा. Or how can I change my particular principal accounting principle? Let's say if I talk about my inventory valuation, किस तरीके से change होगा? मेरी cost allocation कैसे change हो सकती है? Cost allocation method. A cost allocation, there may be a change in cost allocation method also, depending on the situation. अब कंपनी का प्रोडक्शन का प्रोसेस ही चेंज हो गया तो आपका कॉस्ट एलोकेशन मेथड भी आपका चेंज हो जाएगा. When we upgrade, let's say now if you have a different machinery, initially I'm giving you and I'll help you with the help of I'll try to explain you with the help of one example. एक कंपनी है उनकी प्रोडक्शन प्रोसेस में जहां पे अभी तक ह्यूमन इंटरवेंशन बहुत ज्यादा थी. Now what was happening is the production process was mainly driven by the labor cost. So most, if I talk about for production time, in production time of my total, the manufacturing cost, if I talk about for the labor cost, it was constituting somewhere around, let's say of a total cost, it was 50%. Now company has introduced some new machinery in the system now. Now this thing has speed up the production process and reduced the labor cost from 50% to 20%. Now everything, my cost allocation mechanism, my many items were being based on a labor cost, my labor hours deployed. तो मेरी बहुत सारी कॉस्ट जो लेबर आवर कॉस्ट के ऊपर थी अब वो मशीन आवर्स के ऊपर चली जाएगी. So the standard and this principle indicate, harmonize and standardize the cost accounting principle and practices. क्या आप किस तरीके से change करोगे? It's not only about that. The how to apply. It talks about, you know, how to change from, how to switch over from one method to another method. Provide guidance to users to achieve uniformity, consistency in classification. Now, as I told you previously also, अभी हम जैसे पहले भी डिस्कस किया है कि कॉस्ट एलोकेशन कैसे होगी. Now, inventory classification कैसे होगी? Now, it's been defined. Now, company do not have a liberty. You want me to stop? Somebody wants to question? Okay, I'll start. So, provide guidance to you in to achieve uniformity, consistency in classification, measurement, कैसे करना है, assignment and allocation. How the cost has to be assigned and allocated to various products and services. So it's being defined. It helps us to do that. Arrive at the basis of computing the cost of product. Sorry, I can't hear. You can message me, please, if I can't hear you. I'm sorry, is this Aishwarya speaking something? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You can text me, please message me. So, as I told you, it helps in achieving the classification, measurement, assignment, a cost assignment, how I have to assign my cost, and then allocation. Allocation means allocation within the department of a cost. You would have अभी तक आपने स्टडी किया होगा कि मेरी cost allocation कैसी हो, cost मेरे को assign कैसे करनी है. So this guideline will, this standard will help us to do that. Arrive at a best computing cost of a product and activity and services where required by legal or regulatory bodies. Now, what happens at time and again, we have different, requirement coming from legal and regulatory bodies also. कि इसकी costing कैसे होगी product की. So this standard helps us to follow that. So once we follow this standard, it helps us to gain that confidence of the demanding authority and a regulatory body with regard to the cost computation and the procedure that we have followed to arrive at cost. So it helps the practicing member to use the cost accounting standards in the statistician of general purpose cost statements. So अभी ये जो standard है, इनसे जब आप practice में रहेंगे as a cost auditor, it helps you to attest the general purpose cost statement. जो मेरी cost statement है general purpose वाली, उसको attest करने में help मिलेगी. Because as I told you, how these standards are helpful for cost auditor. तो cost auditor के लिए, now these standards comes up as a guideline. It comes up as a Bible to follow and then to perform their, the audit work and for the attestation, to capture their finding, to discussion, and to record their findings on, and also to suggest the improvements. It also helps in assist in clear and uniform understanding and other related issues of the various user organization, government bodies, regulatory research agencies, and academic institutions. So, I mean, standard, when we read it, so it gives us, I mean, about the user organization, government bodies, उनके भी inputs मिलते हैं आपको. They also share their best practices. उनके जो issues होते, now user organization means जो मेरे product को use कर रहे हैं. Now, who are we may be customer to somebody, somebody may be customers to us also. जो मेरे clients हैं, गवर्नमेंट बॉडीज के लिए है, रेगुलेटरी बॉडीज है, वो किसी को अगर कोई या रिसर्च एजेंसीज है उनको, नाउ हाउ रिसर्च एजेंसीज आर हेल्पफुल, दे परफॉर्म रिसर्च ऑन पर्टिकुलर इंडस्ट्री. When they say a cost per unit of a particular industry, yeah, for example, they say that cost of a mobile or cost of a milk product of an ice cream or one packet liter of a milk is itna hai. So when they pass on any comment, it is being said that how the cost is arrived at is based on this cost accounting standard. So the practice has to be uniform, then only it becomes comparable kind of document and a comparable kind of a study and a research, then only we can perform. Unless until the bases are same, जब तक ये मेरे जो criteria है basis है same नहीं होंगे, till that time we cannot do the comparison. So this standard makes the results of the industry, जो जिस industry में हम काम कर रहे हैं, and the other competitor company and my company, जिस company के लिए हम लोग records maintain कर रहे हैं, उसको comparable बनाते हैं. Then only we can compare when we follow these standards. So how this standard is relevant? So as we discussed that who makes these standards? It's a cost accounting standard board which is defining these guidelines. Now, why these are standard? How this standard is important for cost audit? We just discussed right now. So now in today's class, my objective was to give you about what is the cost audit, how costing, the relationship between my cost audit and costing, my cost records, the importance of my cost standards for my cost audits, for my auditee company which is maintaining records, as a cost accountant when I'm working for a company, how these standards are applicable to me, what am I supposed to do, that information comes to me from these standards. As an auditor, these standards provides me guidelines to understand means how the records should be maintained and how these records are being maintained, what should be the classification of cost, and all these details are being made available from this. So just to summarize, we'll go back a little bit and then I'll take you to the last slide. We have discussed about the cost accounting, cost records, cost statements, what the purpose of the cost, what the cost accounting is. You guys are in final, so by now you would have heard about you have learned a lot about the costing, the purpose of costing, why we are doing this, the nature of cost audits, it's being introduced by government. What type of examination is this? It's empowered by Section 148 of the Companies Act 2013. A recap is very important in life. Cost accounting standards, what are these standards, why these are important as a cost auditor, as an auditor, how this helpful to me, and what all a cost auditor is supposed to do at the time of the auditor, how the client is, how these standards are relevant for the client, why they need to know about these standards, how these cost audits started, why, how come the need of a cost audit was felt, and what mechanism has come up with these cost audits. We discuss about the cost audit objectives. It's not only merely to check the compliance with regard to our standard, but standard lays down many more things beyond our cost audits. That talks about for the efficient use of resources. It talks about the methods being adopted for the costing. Then it talks about for the support and finalization of pricing, and then help the management to drive the improvements and other focus. Cost accounting standard, who made this, and then how these standards integrates various users requirements, and then helps us to arrive at the cost. How it's a summary, means this standard is relevant for how, for a particular industry, in terms of harmonizing, syncing the various principal practices, arrive at a cost in a particular manner, which makes the cost and information comparable within industry, within company, and also to for an auditor to attest these statements. Now we'll take a glance of various cost accounting standards. So you would have read about the Indian accounting standard, international accounting standards. So there are the 24 cost accounting standards. Now each standard deals with different type of item and different subject. Its area and focus is different. There's a cost accounting standard 1. It talks about the classification of cost. How an organization has to classify the cost. What are the various components of cost, like material, labor, overheads, machinery related, how the cost will be classified. Production and operations related overheads, how they will be captured. I think some are missing. Yeah, I'll look at that. Average cost of transportation, material cost, employee cost. I mean, these standards are specifying these things. Just give me 1 second. So it's about the classification of cost. Cost accounting standard 2 is about the capacity planning. So it's being missing, that line is missing while making this PPT. I'll just remake it and share it with you. And then it talks about, the various aspects. And then the standard talks about how the material cost, how employee cost has to be, captured, recorded, the cost of utilities, packing material cost. So it has, specified for my administrative overheads, repair and maintenance, cost of service center, pollution center cost, selling and distribution overheads, how depreciation and amortization has to be done. The standard has categorically explained this in detail. So research and development costs, joint costs, joint costs are, you'd have read in the subject also. So it makes the costing a little bit complicated when joint costs are there, because these are the common costs. How this cost has to be allocated when a joint common production process is there, how this cost has to be allocated to different processes or different products, which comes up after this. The royalty and technical, how this has to be done, what are the quality control measures which has to be in place, how those should be recorded, manufacturing cost, overburden removal cost, treatment of revenue and cost statements. So the standard is specifically stating for each of the area, for each of the classification costs related to material in every item, how it has to be captured, how this is being done, how calculation has to be performed, what type of record has to be done, what format you have to use. So this is a standard is specifying all this. And it is a guideline for a company to classify cost, because if they do not follow, it leads to non-compliance and a wrong costing. My cost per unit and my entire costing records goes for a toss. My production and operation head overhead cost, it goes for a toss. My material cost may not be captured, or may not be, I may be capturing, which may not be of a complete, may not be a complete cost, or may not have captured in the appropriate manner, which gives the complete, comprehensive information about my material cost, my employee cost. So this we'll be talking about these standards. Some of these standards will pick up and elaborate how this is what is being applied, and during cost audit, how these things are relevant for performing an audit. As an auditor, I need to look at my cost accounting standard number 6, material cost, what it talks about, how a particular material cost has to be captured, recorded, how it has to be allocated, and what type of record need to be maintained. It talks about all those details. So the focus of the cost audit is not only to check the compliance and everything, it's also need to assess how a company is using its cost accounting system to maintain their records, cost records, and developing the cost statements. Are those as per the cost accounting standards? As a cost auditor, and for the company also, how am I supposed to go and make these records is being evident through is the guidelines which is available in my cost accounting standards. So anything that you read over here in these standards is the Bible. Nothing is beyond this. Nobody can question this, that how this has to be done. Why, I mean to say, as an auditee, as an auditor, these are the scopes which defines how anybody has to decide about the cost allocation, how direct expenses has to be done, how cost has to be classified. So these are the guidelines that need to be followed by a company, by an auditor, for an attestation, and for the improvement and other purposes, and for comparison whenever it has to be used. So these are really helpful to go and decide on the right cost accounting, record management, and the audit practices. So we'll end this today here, and then we'll, if you have some questions, then you can ask me. Somebody asked me for sharing the notes. I'll tell you what I picked up over here is basically a brief, and when you go through your study material, it's being elaborated in detail over there. So what you see over here is a snapshot, and what you see in your study material is much more detailed. So the idea of this PPT is to sync you up and relate with your study material or your other books of the cost audits. When you read it will help you to understand how to look at those things. इससे आपको help मिलेगी how to go and summarize these information, because I have changed the order of the information in the book. I presented this information so that you are able to link up between the standard, auditor, company, allocation, and the information. Please, you asked me a question. It has come from some Kesri, that in case for a better preparation and presentation, can an organization do so? See, as I told you, these are basically the guideline document. Nobody can go beyond this. So everything, boundary lines and scope is defined within these standards. And if someone do not follow this, it leads to, as I told you, a wrong cost calculation, which will attract the audit findings. So my cost records will not comply with the requirement of my cost audits rules and my costing standards. So as I told you, in case if the records are not being maintained as per the requirement and standards, it attracts penalties under section 147. So there is no choice except to follow these standards. So it is not a choice for an auditor, for a company, or for anybody. So these are the standards which are laid and approved at an appropriate authority, as we say, this cost accounting standard setting board, which has authority to decide on these things. So for every company and for every auditor, it is mandatory to follow these standards and these cost accounting rules. So we'll go more in detail. In a company, they do not follow standard for allocation of a cost. What happens? They may be playing with the cost allocation method. For what reason? Just to save their cost, to highlight their better performance, to show the low cost, or to reduce their profit, to reduce their profitability. कोई अपना प्रॉफिट क्यों कम करना चाहता है? ताकि उसके टैक्सेस बच जाए. मैं इस साल लीफो यूज करता हूं, तो मेरा क्या होगा? इस साल तो कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन बढ़ गई, लेकिन अगले साल का मेरा जो इस साल की एंडिंग इन्वेंट्री, वो अगले साल की ओपनिंग इन्वेंट्री होती है. वो बिगिनिंग इन्वेंट्री जो होगी मेरी अगले साल की, उसमें मेरी कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन कम हो जाएगी, तो अगले साल के मेरे प्रॉफिट बढ़ जाएंगे. So these type of practices leads to the frauds and mal practices, which are being identified and viewed very seriously. So nobody should play around these things. Yes, you can definitely make it better through your implementing your policies and to drive a better kind of cost accounting system by making new policies. So I believe I have answered you on this. So thank you all. Okay. So thank you all. So in the next class, we'll take up some more in depth into the cost accounting rules, records, and these things, and then we'll discuss more in detail. Right. So thank you all. I tried to take up all of your questions. If there is something more, so you can text me. I'll try to answer that to the best of my abilities. Thank you so much. It was a really nice interaction with you. Thanks.